And I'd like to introduce our first speaker, which is giving the keynote address, The Battle, January 8th, the Fateful Day, by Ron Chapman. Mr. Chapman is one of our most prolific speakers. He's a professor of history at Nunez Community College, and over 16 plus years in the symposium, as well as our sister organization, the Nunez History Lecture Series. He's given more lectures than anybody. He's given presentations across Louisiana and beyond, a lot back to the community. He wrote a book that's become one of the standards, The Battle of New Orleans, But for a Piece of Wood. And his role in the symposium has been our foundation. We deal with a lot of topics, but always we ask Mr. Chapman to give that first bedrock lecture that gives the basics of the battle itself, so then we can build on that. So I'll present to you Mr. Ron Chapman.
I have to lower the mic. Can you all hear me okay? Great, great. I want to thank you all for arriving, and I guess best get started because I have a time limit on me and I tend to talk, as my wife will agree. All right, the first thing I want to start with, if we'll move around, is this particular painting here. This is by Jean-Hyacinthe Leclerc, and it's a watercolor. He was one of the engineers for Andrew Jackson. He did a series of sketches throughout the battle, and then after it was over with, he assembled them into this watercolor. And there's a lot going on here that we'll be talking about. First of all, you have the cypress swamp in the back, and this cut in the woods is actually somewhat controversial. Some say it was there, some say it wasn't. Since it's in the painting, I'm inclined to believe it was. Here you have Jackson's line. Here you have the McCarty plantation. Over here you have the ruins of the Chalmette plantation. The Chalmette's plantation was blown up the night of the 28th. On here, you're looking from across the river, so your perspective is from Patterson's battery across the river. Jackson had a battery across the river that actually placed the British in a crossfire. As they approached, the cannons come in this direction, and from across the river would have created a crossfire here. What you see assembled here are Gibbs's troops hitting what Pakenham thought was the weakest part of the American line. Well, it was till 2 days before, when 2,500 Kentuckians and Tennesseans showed up and Jackson lined them up in ranks of 4. It changed the whole perspective. But from earlier attacks, Pakenham had seen that as being a weak spot. When you come this way, there's this forward redoubt. Jackson really didn't want that. His officers kind of insisted, their point being, if there's a cannons here, as the British approach the line, you can shoot down the line to get them. Jackson's perspective was, yeah, but if they get that forward redoubt, they could turn those guns against my own right and then open up the door for an attack along the levee. That's almost what happens here. And if you look at this painting, you can see these guys, British here, that's Colonel Rene's men. Pakenham had them on the day of the 8th on the opposite side of the levee, so they're protected from fire this way, attacking the redoubt, and that's them actually taking the redoubt briefly. Okay? And then here you have some of Keene's men on the other side reinforcing. So you see there's a lot going on that's historically accurate. Now, myths. There's so many myths about the Battle of New Orleans. I'd like to try to dispel some. The Battle of New Orleans was fought on one day. We celebrate January 8th because it was such a splendid victory. Kinda. We'll get into that later. But it was very close. But anyway, it wasn't one day. If you sit down and look at it, the actual campaigns, planning and everything begins in April, 10 months before. The actual fighting begins in September. It's a 5-month, it doesn't end January 8th. The treaties aren't ratified to February 16th. It's a long period of time, and a lot happens. There were about 10 different battles, not one. Next issue is the War of 1812 was over. Everybody's heard that. Local newscaster said that on the 200th anniversary. I wanted to jump through the radio. No. On the 24th, there have been long negotiations. Those of us who remember the Vietnam War remember how long those negotiations went on, right? You start negotiations, but then you always let the battlefield determine what's going to happen in the negotiations. On the 24th, the negotiators signed an agreement, but it wasn't ratified, and the document itself said until it's ratified, it has no meaning. It had to be signed by the King of England, signed by the President of the United States, and passed by the United States Senate. That doesn't happen until February 16th. Until that date, game on, okay? Next, the British won. Everything would have been returned according to the Treaty of Ghent. No again. In the Treaty of Ghent, it says all property be returned to their rightful owner. From the American perspective, they were talking about islands off the coast of Maine. From the British perspective, they were looking at the Louisiana Purchase. The rightful owner of Louisiana Purchase is Spain, because the treaty that France used to get Louisiana stated that they would never return, they would return it to Spain rather than sell it to anybody else. Napoleon lied. Imagine that. Okay? Furthermore, they never paid for it. They promised him Tuscany and never gave it to him. So in essence, Louisiana was a stolen car. Okay, so as far as the British were concerned, I'm giving the car back to its rightful owner. So consider the implications of that. That's very serious. Lastly, had little impact on the future of the United States. If we lost Louisiana, what would happen to Western expansion? When you consider, we'll be talking about that in a later lecture tomorrow, when you consider the entire sequence of events that unfold, it's frightening. I mean, you can look into World War I and World War II if we didn't have a continental power as the United States. So this is the area that could have been lost. Half the United States. And it would have been reinforced because Spain was weak, but the British Army occupied Canada, would have New Orleans, control the Mississippi River. It would have been a mess. And we didn't have the money to buy it again. So when you consider the implications of this, it could be serious. Now, not just one battle. As I said, there's a whole sequence of battles. I won't get into them all because we'd be here all day. I might enjoy it, but I don't think you would. Anyway, yeah, the Creek Indian Wars. Just like you see us right now in, excuse me, in the Middle East, doing special forces and supplying weapons and all that stuff, the Brits were doing the same thing to the Indians, especially the Creek Indians, the Red Stick portion of the Creek Indians. They were coming in, they were giving them uniforms, giving them training, giving them weapons, everything they possibly needed. That's actually what brings Jackson into the war. You have the attacks on Port Boyer, the Battle of Pensacola, the Battle of Lake Borgne, the night battle of the 23rd, the assault on the 28th, the assault on the 1st, the assaults on January 8th, both East Bank and West Bank, Cochrane's attacks on the 4th, and the final successful event is a British victory. They take Fort Boyer off the coast of Mobile. So this is a lot happening here. Non-American support, this is basically on the frontier. As I said, they're supplying all sorts of arms. They were openly supporting the Native Americans in a bloody fighting that was taking place. Tecumseh, in early as 1811, travels down south to meet with the Creek Indians. He's able to take a section of them away called the Red Sticks. They called that because they painted their tomahawks red. And as a consequence, they basically set the frontier on fire with open British support. Okay, I've discovered that. This opened up the Creek Indian War, and through Pensacola and Apalachicola, the British ships were landing all the supplies these Indians needed. Fort Mims massacre is what brings Jackson into it. Now imagine, Jackson's up in his home in Tennessee, laying in bed with a bullet wound in his shoulder from a duel with the Benton boys. Jackson was a bit of a hot-tempered individual, okay? So what happens is Fort Mims, a group of people, and some of the more loyal Creek Indians, hear about problems and a possible invasion of the Red Sticks. They retreat into Fort Mims. The Red Sticks attack it, and what you end up with is 517 people killed, others wounded. They brutally scalp, they're beating children's brains against the walls. Jackson is furious. He leaps out of bed and says, I'm going to saddle, I'm rallying my militia, I'm going to war, which he does. This is a series of battles along the front here where Jackson is fighting. The major one here is down here at Horseshoe Bend. That's when he finally captures the Creek Indians at a position they thought was unassailable. They met the wrong man. He took them. If you can see the numbers that were killed, he broke the back of the Creek Indians and ended the Indian War. This is Mobile. This is Pensacola. The British are operating out of Pensacola. And what they've done is, it gets complicated because you're dealing with the wars in Europe, the Napoleonic Wars, but they had finally forced Napoleon out of Spain. Spain was more or less under their influence, should we say. The British then come to Pensacola, and with Governor Manrique, they work out an arrangement where they occupy the Spanish forts, and they fly British flags under the Spanish flags. So they're physically presently there. The Gulf Campaign is triggered in many ways by Napoleon. He gets captured, he loses, he abdicates, and he's sent to the island of Elba in 11th of April, okay? Now, the British have this massive army and navy. They've been fighting Napoleon, their hands are free. So they bring this amassed group of forces to America. And remember, this isn't too far after the American Revolution. They got a lot of guys, especially in the military, that want catchback, okay? So they're aggressively now going to show America. I have friends of mine that are from Britain, and they still call us the colonies, okay? So it's there still, okay? So they amassed their forces for this major offensive, and the first place they go is Washington, D.C. I'm sure you've all heard about the Battle of Bladensburg when they marched in and burned Washington, D.C. In fact, they literally ate the president's lunch, because when they got to the White House, his dinner was set. They sat down, ate his dinner, it was still warm, drank his wine, and set fire to the White House. After that, they set fire to other buildings in the Capitol, and then, believe it or not, a strange storm came in which drove them out. The next is Baltimore, Fort McHenry. You'll hear more about that from Michelle Miner when she talks about the national anthem. This is critical, actually, to the Battle of New Orleans, because it was a naval bombardment of Fort McHenry, but it was also a military engagement, a land invasion to go by land and take Baltimore. The general who was leading that was General Ross. He was a very, very inventive man, powerful officer. He gets killed by an American sniper. This is the guy who's supposed to lead the attack in New Orleans. With him gone, they have to replace him. They turn to the Duke of Wellington. He goes, I want nothing to do with it. So they turn to his brother-in-law, Sir Edward Pakenham, who has military experience, but at this stage as a staff officer, he's given the orders now to come to Louisiana. He's in London. So that's why he arrives late. He's got to sail from London to the Caribbean to Jamaica, from Jamaica to New Orleans. So he's playing catch-up, trying to find his army, and before he, to get into the battle. Then the campaign turns to the Gulf of Mexico. This is all in the hands of Admiral Cochrane. Okay, now he's a guy that's of questionable background, and he's greedy. Wellington said he hated to see his brother-in-law involved with such a man. The city of New Orleans had millions of dollars in those terms of wealth because they had blockaded the city. It was just accumulating, coming down the rivers and sitting here. The law of the land back then was if you seize it, it belongs as prize money to the officers and men who do it. So the Army and Navy, especially people like Cochrane, would become incredibly wealthy by taking New Orleans. So there was a personal advantage there despite the strategic advantage. So the Gulf Expedition now starts turning to the city of New Orleans and beginning its operation, okay? Spain is now cooperating more openly because of Napoleon. This is Napoleon's abdication papers. He still writes his name big, even though his position's diminished, so to speak. I love this. We talk about politics today and media, right? This is a painting by David of Napoleon on a white fiery stallion with his finger pointed as he crosses the Alps with the winds and fortune behind him, driving him over the mountains. He actually crossed on a donkey, but let's not let facts get in the way of propaganda. And of course, once he goes to Elba, the British decide, well, we'll do this one. We'll put him backwards on a jackass with his broken sword heading to Elba with some drums beating his way across. So it just goes to show, even back then, you had fun with editorial and cartooning. This is the area, and it's important. I know everybody grew up thinking there's 13 American colonies. No. There are 14 American colonies. After the French and Indian War, Louisiana got Florida. British got Florida. And West Florida is right here. It's up the Mississippi River, east of the Mississippi River, up to about Vicksburg, I believe, north of the lakes, all the way down to Apalachicola River. Here it is. It's under Governor Johnstone. It's British governor. This is British territory. It's a colony. And as the American Revolution is percolating, some loyalists are moving into the area under the Spanish land grants. You know, they have lands that are there, so they're moving in. So there's a number of Brits that are starting to live in this area. This is important because when the British have designs on potentially moving through this, they might have allies, okay? This is the actual theater of war. It's not just Chalmette. And this is Fort Boyer, presently Fort Morgan, if anybody's been at the mouth of Mobile Bay. This is critical because what happens is the British have designs, and this is the idea. It's William Percy on the Hermes writes a letter to Cochrane saying, listen, that Fort Boyer, there's really not a lot there. We can take it really easy. I'll take flotilla with several ships. I'll put some Marines and Indians on the land side. We'll hit it from two directions. It's gone. Once it's gone, we take Mobile. From Mobile, we can move cross inland. Remember, the 14th colony, hit the Mississippi River, float down the Mississippi River, and take New Orleans from the north. The big advantage here is they got about a 14,000-man army. They can keep that entire army intact, and they got land that they can take land from and food from and water from as they go. So Louisiana would have been facing a massive invasion. It doesn't work out quite the way they planned. What happens is he attacks the forts, but his ship, the Hermes, runs aground. Bow forward, which means he can't bring his guns to bear, so the Americans start hammering. He immediately turns around and cuts sails and does what he has to do to swing the ship around so he can put broadsides against the fort. The ship spins around and runs aground stern first. Still can't bring guns to bear. So his ship gets pretty well beaten up. He has to have the Seahorse come up with boats to relieve him and get most of his crew off that survived. He blows the Hermes up. The land invasion fails. So if you go to Williams Research Center, you get this great letter from Percy where you can almost imagine him shaky as he's writing to Cochrane. You know that easy victory I told you about? Well, it didn't work out. Not only did we not win, I lost my ship. I lost a bunch of guys. This is really not a good scene. The important thing here is now they don't have their land invasion, okay? Jackson's furious. So Jackson takes 3,500 men, and he heads around to Pensacola. He sends some guys up, you know, under a flag of truce to talk to Governor Manrique about what's this with the Brits. They shoot at him. Jackson's furious. He shot onto people under a flag of truce. So he then immediately sends some captured Spanish soldiers with a flag of truce. They shoot at them. I don't particularly care. And finally he decides Manrique doesn't know what to do, because he doesn't want to go to war. He's torn. The British are on one side, Jackson's on the other. Jackson, if you know Jackson, decides, oh, the hell with all of this, I'm just going to invade. He does. The British then blow up their forts, the Spanish forts, in retreat. He takes over Pensacola. So once he's done that, then he starts moving back towards Mobile. So this is the area here. This is Lake Bourne, and these are the islands. This is up around Mobile. So the Brits now are going to be sailing along the coast to establish themselves and anchor along the Chandelier Islands. There'll be somewhere around 80 or 90 ships there. There'll be 14,000 soldiers and about 3,500 sailors. This is a major invasion. Empty cargo ships. And included in there are civil authorities to run the government. So the Brits are sailing along here. The Americans have 5 gunboats. 3 are here. 2 are sent forward to see what the British are doing. As the British fleet starts coming this direction, they're shadowing it out of gun range, and they decide, you know, all right, we're going to have a confrontation. The Brits have to enter this area. It was very well done by Tony Fernandez, did a lecture on the Battle of Lake Bourne. I won't get into the details, because he did, and it was really a wonderful lecture just the other night. Bottom line is, this is a map showing the, you know, the operations. What the Brits do is they decide the water's too shallow for the ships, so they take these landing barges, they mount a carronade on the front of each, 44 of them. They line them up, and the 5 gunboats are here that Captain A.P. Catesby Jones has used to try to block entrance to Lake Bourne. They literally row, and a battle takes place right here in Lake Bourne, First Battle of Lake Bourne. This is a painting of the battle as it took place. This is what the Jefferson's gunboats, these are the only things American defense had, were these small gunboats. This is a model of one. So here's a cannon mounted forward, and a few guns on the sides, okay? So this is a map. This is where Jackson is. Word gets back to him about the defeat at Lake Bourne, because the Americans are overwhelmed within an hour and a half. So Jackson City, now this is an important map, and I want you to look at it, because this is the city of New Orleans. This will be line Jackson, right here in Chalmette. Behind that's line Dupree, behind that's line Montreal. It's called defense in depth. If he gets taken here, he moves here. If he gets taken here, he moves here. If he gets taken here, he's in the suburbs. And most people believe he would have done what the Tsar did and burned New Orleans rather than let the Brits get it, which is possible. He wasn't from here. He wasn't a local. On the other side... These are the plantation lines. It's called the long lot system. So these are all the different plantations. So this is all along the edge here. This is on the opposite side. You have line Jackson here. This is the battery I was talking about, Patterson's battery. You got defensive positions forward back here. This is the last line, Beaujolais, of American defense. This is Algiers Point. Now think about this. If the Brits get Algiers Point, they can hammer New Orleans from across the river. Just keep that in the back of your head, okay? Now, what happens? When the Brits land and get Lake Bourne, we're betrayed. Bayou Bienvenue, all waterways were supposed to be closed. Bayou Bienvenue wasn't. Why? We still don't know, but it wasn't. But then some individuals, should we say, conspired with the Brits to show them how to get up Bayou Bienvenue behind the Villeray plantation. So when the Brits arrive at the mouth of Bayou Bienvenue in Lake Bourne, they send Lieutenant Piddle, dressed as an Islano, so I shouldn't say Islano, I say a fisherman, because the Islanos had nothing to do with, on the negative side, they fought with us. Dressed as a fisherman, he paddles a pirogue all the way up here, gets behind the Villeray plantation at night, crosses, kneels over, drinks out the Mississippi River, goes back and tells General Keane, yeah, they weren't lying. This is a clear shot below the city. At which point then the Brits start coming up with Colonel Thornton. Colonel Thornton's one of my men. I love Colonel Thornton. He's like a Navy SEAL. You gotta have heroes on all sides, gotta have an open mind. So Thornton and Keane come with 1,600 men. They get behind the Villeray plantation. They take a breather, because as Curtis alluded to, we're in the middle of the mini ice age. It runs from around 1250 to 1870. It's incredibly cold. These guys are tired. They've been, the line of support is from Ship Island to here. It's 80 miles. So the second group of heroes are the British Navy, who have to row every soldier, every cannon, every cannonball, 80 miles each direction. These guys had to be built like Arnold. Okay? So what it is in the morning, they charge through the fields and they capture the Villeray plantation. Gabriel Villeray sitting down, his feet up on a rail, cleaning a gun, and all of a sudden he's surrounded by Brits. He freaks out. He jumps up and decides why, we don't know, to run into his house and go out the back door. When he opens the back door, Thornton's waiting for him with a drawn saber, makes him a prisoner. The British now take over the house, turn it into a headquarters. I got to speed up because I'm running out of time here. He jumps out the window, escapes, crosses the river, takes horses, goes up here. There's actually a ferry, crosses the ferry, jumps on his horse again, heads to Jackson on Royal Street where his headquarters is, and lets you know the British are at my house. In the meantime, Jackson's engineer, Arsene de la Tour, said, something might be going on down in Chalmette way. Let me go down with a few guys and check it out. He goes down and he runs into people coming forward saying the British are at the Villeray plantation. He goes, sneaks forward, does a basic head count, comes back and tells Jackson, yeah, the Brits are really there. This is where the strength of Jackson comes in. It takes him but a moment to decide, A, the British will not sleep a night on American soil, and he plans an attack. This is the attack. He turns around to Patterson, Commodore Patterson, says, listen, take the Carolina. He's only got 2 ships in the Mississippi. Float it down opposite the British camp at the Villeray plantation. And in the immortal words of Elmer Fudd, be very, very quiet. Don't say a word. Don't do anything. Just have all your guns loaded. At 7:30 sharp, open the gun ports and just give them hell with broadside. So he does that. As he floats down, the Brits see, remember there's no lights on the river, so you got to figure it's dark. This is time when there's a lot of fog around too. We know what that's like. We just experienced it. So the Brits just look at the ship. They think it's theirs. They don't know what it is. Some of them are yelling at it. Some are screaming at it. Some of them are hailing. Some actually shoot at it. Nothing. It's like a ghost vessel. It's just sitting there. And they're on the levee trying to figure what is this all about. In the meantime, Jackson has Delarande and Beale's riflemen come across the edge of the swamp, and he takes some U.S. Marine soldiers and some cannons and comes down the river road. At 7:30, you can see the lines here. They open fire. Panic breaks out in the British camp. The guys on the levee are wiped out. British don't know what to do. They're running around. They're hiding behind the levee because these cannons are flying over with grape shot. And all of a sudden they hear shooting upriver as Jackson and Delaran attack the men here. You have a major battle taking place, hand-to-hand combat. It only lasts about maybe an hour and a half. It's a night battle. It's foggy. And if anybody shot black powder, you know how much smoke there is. So between the smoke of black powder covered with the fog, in no time you couldn't see anything. Okay? So what happens is Beale's riflemen in particular capture a British soldier, get completely turned around, and march him into the British camp and suddenly describe, I think we made a mistake here. So they become prisoners of war. This is the confusion that's happening. What you see here are reinforcements. To deal with the military is you run to the sound of guns. Jackson realized reinforcements were coming, so he called a pullback. The Brits said, see what a great victory we have. The Americans are like, boy, we put it on them. You know, so both sides are claiming a victory here. The Brits, if you look in the back there, you see a Kentucky long rifle. Next to it's a Tomahawk. The next morning, when the Brits look at the bodies, they're horrified at what they see. They've never seen men chopped up the way some of these guys were. Because the Tennesseans, in hand-to-hand combat, they're Indian fighters. They carry a tomahawk. You know, Brits would hit you with the butt of a rifle. A Tennessean's going to take your face off with a hot tomahawk. So they're totally shocked at the carnage that they're witnessing here. A lot of people went down. You don't hear about that. There was a lot of deaths on both sides. So now you have the situation on the map. The Brits now occupy this position. On retreating, Jackson sees the Rodrigue Canal. It's an abandoned mill race. He starts digging it out and building it up as a defense line, has men posted up forward here around the Delaran plantation as forward pickets. He then starts looking at constructing a battery across the river here. December 25th, Pakenham arrives. Pakenham's in a hurry to get there because he hates Cochrane. And he's figuring by the time he gets there, Cochrane's going to be serving him dinner in New Orleans, and he's furious. But when he gets there, he sees a static situation on the battlefield. He walks up to a soldier and he says, why haven't you advanced? And the guy looks at him and says, bullets. Damn bullets. That's all. And then he says, what God's name's going out there in the river? They said, well, this ship's been hammering us. He says, well, get rid of it. So what he does is he builds basically a furnace for hot shot. You get the shot red hot, you roll it into a cannon, and you fire it at a wooden ship. Well, lucky shot, within the first couple of shots, it lands in the rope locker. Carolina's on fire. It's going to hit the magazine. Everybody jumps overboard, and they blow it up. Pakenham is now a hero to his men, plus he brought in reinforcements. December 28th, he organizes an attack. He looks at Jackson's line, and this is called a reconnaissance in force. The idea being, let me check it out. I don't know how strong this thing is, so I'm going to advance full attack as best I can, and if it's weak, we'll take it. If it's stronger than we thought, we'll pull back, but we've gained intelligence. Now remember, they don't have land artillery. They're using naval guns. I don't know if you know what a naval gun is. If you go out to the battlefield, it's got those little wheels on it. The wheels are made for recall. You get your direction from pointing the ship. You get your elevation from the gunner watching the ship roll. He times his roll. They drag these guns from the fleet on these boats. They weigh over a ton. Drag them through the marsh and set them up in Chalmette. Okay, so he opens up his attack with battle, but he don't have enough ammunition to sustain things. The Americans now have put up a spirited defense, because by this time, certain people like Belush, Dominique Yu, the pirates have now shown up, and they're pretty good at firing cannons. Plus, he's got army guys there, so he's got he don't have a lot of artillery, but he's got good gunners. The British realize they're not getting anywhere, so Pakenham signals a retreat. After it's over with, the officers get together. There's several occasions when the Brits could have won this thing. They get together, Gibbs looks at him and says, why'd you call us back? He said, well, we weren't getting anywhere. He goes, maybe you weren't. But I went through the woods and I was almost behind Jackson's lines. If he'd have gotten behind him, he'd have routed the Americans. But you don't have email, radios, telephones. You don't know these things. So this is an occasion. The first occasion is when they arrived behind the Villeray plantation. And my friend Thornton said, let's go now. And Gibbs is like, no, I don't think so. Not everybody is here. So here's another occasion that's lost. January 1st, it's New Year's Day. Foggy. Again, we know that. Pakenham orders another attack. He brings in even more cannons from the fleet and sets them up. This would be a major artillery battle. The Americans are partying. Hey, we're Creoles, right? It's the first of the year. And us, we're dancing, playing music, having a good time. And through the fog, they can hear the celebration. And they wait. And when the fog lifts, they open fire. Panic breaks out in the American lines. It takes Jackson about 10-15 minutes to get his men organized and together. They get all together. They start counterattacking. Here's where the Brits screwed up. Anybody over here a bartender at any time? Made the Sazerac, old-fashioned? Yeah? You familiar with simple syrup? It's a mess, huh? Well, the Brits kind of screwed up. The gunners were getting shot, because remember, they're using a Brown Bess, which is up there, which is a smooth bore rifle, has a range of about 80 yards. You might hit something. On the other side, you see a Kentucky long rifle. It's accurate to 250 yards. So the idea is if you want to stop a gun, just shoot the guys loading it. So they decide we've got to protect ourselves, so we use what you got. They use barrels of sugar. Well, when cannonballs hit the sugar, sugar is now flying all over the men, all over the guns. It's kind of wet and miserable outside. So they're dealing with cannonballs and powder covered in simple syrup as they're trying to organize an attack, if you can imagine that. In no time whatsoever. And every time they fire one of these big guns, it's sinking in the mud. How do you get it up again? How do you aim it? So they're making a lot of noise, but you can't effectively bring their guns to bear against Jackson's artillery. It fails. Now, Pakenham's criticized because they said, the Americans are partying. Why didn't you just sneak up to their lines? Duh. It would have been a complete surprise attack. So now you're down to the 8th. This is the big battle. And then you have West Bank, with Colonel Thornton. Pakenham decides he's looking at the situation. What am I going to do? He comes up with a brilliant plan. Okay? What he comes up with is decides I'm going to attack both sides of the river at the same time, because that damn battery on the West Bank is hammering me something terrible. So what he does is he turns to Thornton. Who wouldn't? He says, Colonel, this is what I want you to do. I want you to take 1,400 men, cross the river before midnight. You get yourself positioned. You attack Patterson's battery at night, preferably right before dawn. I'll have all my guys lined up on the east bank. When I hear the action across the river, that indicates to me that Patterson's battery is under attack and may be taken. Either event, he can't be focused on what's happening on the east bank. He's got his own problems on the west bank. He's got to defend himself. Renee, now talk around to this. He tells William Thornton across the river. On the east bank, he tells Gibbs, I want you to attack the weak part in Jackson's line, because the ground's soft there. They really can't put any artillery there, that we've noticed close to the woods. Of course, like you said, he didn't realize 2,500 Kentuckians and Tennesseans showed up 2 days before and filled that gap. Then he turns to Mullins, Colonel Mullins. He says, He said, we're making ladders and fascines. Fascines are groups of sugar cane that are cut into bundles about 4 feet high, and boarding ladders. He says, you take the 44th. You get ahead of Gibbs, and your job is to rush forward, take those fascines of sugar cane and throw it in that big ditch in front of the American lines. Then the rest of your guys drop the ladders over the top, get out the way. Gibbs's men will run over the ladders. That's how we're going to get behind and approach the line. It's a good plan. Renee, I want you to go along the river, between the Batcher and the river, and you take that damn forward redoubt. Keene, I want you to reinforce him on this side of the levee. Because if he takes that redoubt, I don't have enough men to make a full attack. You're in a position then to really hit Jackson by the river. If not, you're also in a position then to diagonally reinforce Gibbs if he makes a breakthrough. We got a choice on either side. Everything set? And one of the officers turns to Pakenham and says, you sure you want Mullins to do this? I mean, this is a guy who's young, inexperienced. He's never been part of an assault party before. And Pakenham says he'll do his job. Trouble is, Mullins is a young officer whose dad probably paid for his position. He's got his wife in the fleet who he promised dinner in New Orleans for Christmas. He gets these orders and it's like, what? He turns to one of his lieutenants and he says, it's a suicide mission. I said, what do you mean? He says, we got to charge the American lines holding sugarcane on top of our heads. And ladders! Imagine! They're going to kill us! Okay, so he is in a state of panic about this whole thing. He's told the ladders are in a forward redoubt, but there's 2 forward redoubts. So that night, as he's advancing, he passes up the one where the ladders was, goes to the one where the ladders aren't, and for some reason isn't panicked to try to find the ladders. More or less like, oh gee, I wonder where the ladders went. So he's not anxious to participate in what he sees as a suicide mission. So this is the game. What happens is the orders are given to bring the boats into the river. Cochrane's the admiral, they're his boats. We're going to do it the Navy way. Pakenham says, why don't we bring them forward where we brought the cannons forward? You roll them on logs and you bring them up. No. The Navy way is we're going to dig a canal from the Villeray Canal up to the Mississippi River. We line the boats up in it. We build the dam behind it. You put the men in. You open up the levee. The water rushes in. The boats float up. The men paddle across the river. What can Pakenham do? Fine, Admiral. Do it your way. He goes to sleep. About 3 in the morning, he wakes up. Who's he run to? Thornton. What the hell are you doing here? You're supposed to be across the river. Well, you might want to come check this out. So he goes out there, and sure enough, they dug the canal. They put the boats in. They built the dam. Put the guys in, broke the levee. The water came in. The boats rose up. The dam broke. The water went out. The boat sunk in the mud. So I was like, seriously? Get what you can. So they grab the boats they can. They throw it in the river. Thornton is down from 1,400 to 600 men. Keene turns to Pakenham and says, why don't we wait tomorrow? Nothing's going to materially change. But I mean, this whole thing is based on timing, and our timing's kind of screwed right now. Pakenham says, my plans will no longer wait. He's done. The morale's down. Okay? The morale's depressed. So he orders them to cross. Now remember, it's foggy. So he pushes Thornton and his men off. They wave, they bend to the oars, and they head across the river. That's why the subtitle of the book is But for a Piece of Wood, because nobody had the foresight to throw a piece of wood in the river to see if there was a current. As a result, instead of going across the river, they go down the river. And these guys are paddling like fools against the current trying to get across. Pakenham don't know that. He lines all of his guys up in the fog, in the dark, waiting for the sound of guns across the river. Waiting for the sounds of guns across the river. Waiting for the sounds of guns across the river. In the meantime, time's passing, the sun starts coming up, the fog starts to lift. On the American side, Spott's battery says, by Jove, it looks like a bunch of Brits lined up out there. So he fires his cannon. Once he fires his cannon into the British lines, Pakenham sets the signal to fire Congreve rockets in the air, which is a signal for attack, and the attack begins. Of course, Renee, who's supposed to be protected by the levee, isn't, because Patterson's battery is still very much alive. So his men are facing a withering fire as they run along the Batchier. He takes the forward redoubt, turns to his men and says, the day is ours, and he gets shot 3 times, once between the eyes by Beale's riflemen. They're driven off that position. Keene advances and realizes this isn't going anywhere, so he's not sure what to do. Gibbs advances and realizes, where the hell's the 44th with the ladders and fascines? His men are getting slaughtered. There's no way they can cross that breach. So he's got to retreat behind the break in the woods. That's the importance of whether there's a break in the woods or not. He then sends word to Pakenham, I got a problem. I don't know where Mullins and the 44th is. Now what's sad is, when Pakenham left London, a friend of his wrote him a letter and said, Edward, please be careful. And he wrote, well, you know I will. But should the occasion arise where I have to advance to the front to support my men, you know I'll do so at the risk of my life. That's exactly how he dies. Because what happens is he comes forward to try to find the 44th. He gets shot one time in the arm, and the horse is shot out from underneath him. He's put on his aide's Creole pony. He rallies forward to try to find elements of the 44th to get the ladders and fascines. He's hit with a blast of grape shot from a cannon. He's killed. Okay? Renee is killed. The only officer that makes it over the top is a guy named Wilkinson, who turns around, hits the top over the American side, turns to his men and said, forward. And his guys, the Kentuckians, that catch him, say, you do realize you're alone, don't you? And he realizes, I am alone. Then he also realizes, I think I'm shot. He dies. Okay, so that's another officer down. Gibbs begins his second attack, but if you read the account, it's a withering fire of cannons and muskets. They're completely broken. Then they retreat. Mullins can never be found on the battlefield. So this is over with in about 40 minutes. 45 minutes is done. This is their retreat. But what happens on the West Bank? I got to go quick here. This is Andrew Jackson's after letter.
The unfortunate route had totally changed the aspects of effects from which they might annoy us without having, by means of which they might have enabled to defeat in great measures the effects of success on the other side of the river. Thornton is an animal. This was the plan. I'll go real quick. What happens is it takes him downriver. When he hits here, the battle starts. But he don't stop. He comes all the way upriver. So if you look at these positions, I have to go a little faster now. You see, every place he hits, the Americans run away. He hits. When he gets to here, which is Patterson's battery, Patterson wants to turn his guns against the Brits, and his men say, you can't do that. You're going to kill Americans. He says, I don't particularly care. I got to stop the Brits. They say, you can't do that. So he spikes his guns and jumps on the only American boat left in the Mississippi River and pulls offshore so he isn't captured. Thornton then drives past that towards this position all the way up to the last line of defense. He had 600 men, 75 are down, dead or wounded. He himself now has a bullet in him. Jackson's in a panic because he sees what's happening. He knows if the Brits get the West Bank, they can launch attacks with Congreve rockets and cannons into the French Quarter. That's where the legislature is. A lot of Creoles didn't want this to take place anyway. They're liable to surrender. But if Jackson leaves this position and goes to reinforce New Orleans, the Brits still have thousands of men. They can overrun this position. And without Jackson there, you know what'll happen. Plus, a lot of the guys in Jackson's lines, their families and businesses are in New Orleans. They're going to want to run home to protect it. Jackson don't know what to do. Thornton, for his part's wounded. He heads back down to cross over to the river to get patched up, and he wants to see for reinforcements. So he gets to the other side, so I need to see General Pakenham. Oh, he's dead. Oh, okay, well, let me see General Gibbs. No, he's dead. What about Keene? He might as well be dead. He's got gut shot right now, and he's really not talking to anybody. Renee, he's dead. Wilkinson, he's dead. Who the hell's left? General Lambert, the head of the reserves. This man is completely overwhelmed by what he's seen. This is the army that defeated Napoleon, and they're in tatters. He doesn't know what to do. So he sends an officer on the other side to investigate the situation. The guy comes back, says it'll take 2,000 men and all this stuff, and Thornton's looking at him like, I took it with 600. I mean, just give me what I need. We don't know what actually happens here between the two, but we do know that Jackson is in an absolute state of panic. Then he hears a bugle blow, and he looks downriver on his side, and there's 3 British officers, one with a white flag, one with a bugle, and one standing there. So he sends one of his guys down. Guy comes back and hands Jackson a note. He opens it up. I'd like to talk ceasefire, Lambert. Folds the note, hands it. I'll give it back. I don't know any damn Lamberts. He comes back, General of the British Army, Lambert. Damn, we killed all the officers. I don't even know this guy. I'll meet with him. So they meet. He says, what do you want? He says, well, I got a lot of guys down. Yeah, I noticed. You got 763 dead, about 1,000 wounded. What do you want? He says, well, 300 yards forward of your line's a ditch. Let's make that the line of demarcation. You bring my wounded to that position. You bring my dead to that position. Those are seriously wounded. If you don't mind caring for them in New Orleans, I'd appreciate it. He says, that's fine. Then Jackson is a gambler. Always was. And he looks at Lambert, he says, but no ceasefire on the West Bank. It's all on. At which point Lambert looks at him and says, I'll withdraw. And Jackson says, see that you do. And he walks off saying, this guy's an idiot. And the British soldiers, if you read their account, they can't believe they're giving up. They know that they've actually won the Battle of New Orleans, because from the East Bank, they got the only real boats in the river. They've got this thing in their hands, and Lambert gives it up. At which point he withdraws. Jackson immediately reinforces. I got a ceasefire on this side. I'm taking my guys, putting it on the other side. Fills in behind the Brits, builds a battery across to the British camp, and starts hammering them. You know, I got ceasefire here, not here. Okay? Days pass. Gets quiet, real quiet in the British camp. Jackson can see the British sentries lined up, and Lombard, a Frenchman who fought with Napoleon, takes his spyglass, hands it to Jackson, says, take a look at those guys. What do you see? He says, well, I see British soldiers lined up. He says, no. Look above their head. What do you see? He says, I see a crow. He says, ever see a crow fly over a guy's head? Those aren't people. He says, what? He says, those aren't people. Send somebody down and check it out. So he sends a scout down. The guy comes back and says, they're not people. They've taken the uniforms of dead British soldiers, stuffed them up with sugar cane and marsh grass, and propped them up. They've left. They've gone. Jackson goes to the area. All he finds is Yemenville is a hospital full of seriously wounded men and doctors who just say, look, we're your prisoners, but, we got to take care of these guys. And they bring them to New Orleans, and they're cared for. People in New Orleans can't believe there's only 13 American casualties. They expected all these bodies to come in. They were hot because they could hear the ferocity of this battle. So that's it on that. Then Cochrane, for some crazy reason, on the 16th, decides to do a naval attack on Fort St. Philip down the Mississippi River. Probably that was cover for the evacuation. It's basically over with. The British retreat is brutal as they go through the marshes, dragging the wounded. They're exhausted. They're hungry. One guy writes a story. He's more afraid of alligators than anything else. He's terrified about this whole thing. They go to Dolphin Island where they clean up, get dressed, dress their wounds. Meantime, the ship Tonnant is off the coast of Mobile. The Americans show up, Livingston, other officers, to talk about prisoner exchange and slaves. They want their slaves back. Cochrane meets them in the back of the ship and tells them, you're not getting the slaves back unless they want. As far as prisoner exchange, there's no problem whatsoever. But before you go, I want to show you something. And he has the drapes opened up in the back of his wardrobe, and just then the American flag comes down on Fort Boyer, where it all began, and the British flag goes up. They took Fort Boyer. Now, whether Cochrane was planning to attack again, we'll never know, because the next day a launch pulls up, and a British officer gets off, hands a dispatch to Cochrane. He opens it up, and that's firm affirmation that a treaty and peace has been achieved. He turns to the Americans, hands it to them, they read it, they all retreat to the wardroom and start drinking wine and celebrating the fact that the war is over. And some of the British officers say, we never really wanted this anyway. So while they're drinking, you have bodies laying around. It's kind of sad in that regard, but that's really the end of the Battle of New Orleans. From this point on, the United States and England will be allies in practically everything, even to this day. That's, in essence, how it ended. So thank you so much.